Many societies have applied the scientific method for generations, firmly believing that things do not happen in an arbitrary way. However, in our very recent past, the early days of HIV/AIDS, AIDS was seen as a mysterious disease with an unknown cause. In fact, many public figures blamed the most marginalized groups of people in our society. They thought these were simply bad people who somehow caused the disease, and the disease was divine retribution. I'm now hopping on with another champion of public health, Dr. Helene Gayle. For almost a decade, Dr. Gayle was president and CEO of CARE, a leading international humanitarian organization. An expert on global development, humanitarian, and health issues, she spent 20 years with the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, working primarily on HIV/AIDS. She worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, directing programs on HIV/AIDS and other global health issues. Hello, Dr. Gayle.
Hello, Zainab.
Please tell me about the early days of AIDS.
So, in the very early days, it was kind of a frightening, mysterious disease. We didn't know what caused it. We didn't know what the course of the disease was. We knew that it impacted certain populations. We knew that it was more likely to impact people who injected drugs or men who had sex with men. And while that helped us to understand ultimately the cause, it also, in the early days, stigmatized groups of people. We talked about the 4 H's: heroin users, Haitians, hemophiliacs, and homosexuals. And in many ways, it started to stigmatize groups of people when really the cause had nothing to do with anyone's identity per se. It was that it was a blood-borne disease, and it could be transmitted through blood or other bodily fluids, which then led us to understand more about the cause of AIDS, HIV, that it was a virus, that some of those behaviors might have happened more in certain groups, but it wasn't because of those groups per se.
So there was some bias that clouded the cause and effect.
Well, when you think about cause and effect, in some ways we got it wrong initially because we really thought about it in terms of groups of people who were impacted. But ultimately, it did lead us to an understanding of the cause and the ways in which the disease, the infection, was transmitted. So we ultimately got there, but I think in the meantime, we did a disservice to populations who were stigmatized because they were groups who were, in the early days, disproportionately impacted by the AIDS crisis. Well, I think 2 things that came out of searching for a cause for the AIDS pandemic. One, we did learn that it was caused by a virus, and that allowed us to look for better ways of treating and preventing the spread of HIV infection. I think it also, because of the ways in which groups were treated and labeled early on, it was one of those moments where we had to step back and look at the importance of not focusing on groups of people and people's identities, and the importance of really thinking about what does it mean when you give a group of people or say that a group of people are disproportionately impacted by a disease. How do you do that in a way that still reflects their humanity, at the same time recognizing that often diseases are not randomly distributed. They do impact some populations more than others. But I think AIDS really taught us a lot about being much more humane in the way that we talk about people and diseases, and making sure that we're not further stigmatizing populations that are often already stigmatized for other reasons.
Thank you, Dr. Gayle. Understanding cause and effect is critical for scientists and researchers, as well as for the public when they are looking for ways to prevent and treat a disease. Understanding the cause of a disease or any societal threat motivates the public to take steps that protect themselves, that keep them safe or help them recover from illness, whether that be distributing and using condoms and clean needles, or wearing masks and socially distancing for protection, or avoiding drinking contaminated water. Dr. Donald Hopkins is a former assistant professor of tropical public health at Harvard School of Public Health and was deputy and acting director of the CDC. As director of all health programs at the Carter Center, he led their efforts to eradicate guinea worm disease and river blindness worldwide. Hello, Dr. Hopkins.
Hello, Zainab.
Dr. Hopkins, what is guinea worm?
Guinea worm is an ancient parasite that causes a terrible disease. It involves 2 to 3 foot long worms about the width of a strand of spaghetti coming out directly through the skin. It takes an average of several weeks and sometimes as long as 2 to 3 months for these worms to come out of people's bodies. And this is a very painful process. People become infected by drinking contaminated water, and the water becomes contaminated because when these worms are coming out of the body, that's actually the adult female worm. The adult female worm ejects hundreds of thousands of larvae. These larvae are then taken up by a microscopic shrimp-like creature called copepod, and they mature in the copepod for a couple of weeks. When people then drink water containing these immature larvae in the copepods, a year later, the worm has developed into adulthood and is ready to come out and continue the cycle. When these worms are coming out, children can't walk to school, parents can't run after toddlers, farmers can't farm, so the disease causes ill health, but also impacts agricultural productivity as well as school attendance. It's an awful disease.
Dr. Fagey, a longtime colleague of Dr. Hopkins, joins us to dig deeper.
Hello, Zainab. Hello, Don. So one of the first lessons we learned in smallpox eradication was that this is a cause and effect world. If someone hits me with a baseball bat, breaks my arm, it's so obvious what the cause and effect are. If we see a person with smallpox, usually they remember having been with a person with smallpox 2 weeks earlier. But if you have a disease with a 1-year incubation period, where the problem is really bad water, we drink water every day. Don, how in the world were you able to convey cause and effect with guinea worm?
One of the biggest challenges in combating guinea worm disease was helping people to understand that this terrible disease that they didn't want, that they were now having, was caused by something that they did a year ago. The most effective way of helping people to make that connection was to go with them down to the ponds where they were gathering their drinking water from, gather up some water, filter it through a finely woven cloth, backwash that into a jar of clear water, and then hold that up to the light. Even without a magnifying glass, people could see little things swimming around in this jar of water that they're drinking. And the idea that they are drinking water containing little creatures in it was instinctively repulsive to people. But more importantly, it helped them to make the connection between what they were doing, drinking contaminated water, and this parasite that's coming out of their body. It was very gratifying then to see people, as they began to understand and began to see the exciting progress against this disease, because people knew that this was a disease that had affected their parents, their grandparents, and had been there for time immemorial. They had not understood how to combat it, and so it was gratifying to be able to help them to do that.
Don, I can understand how you were able to get households to strain their water. What did you do with people who were traveling? And I'm thinking, of course, of the people who were herding cattle. How did you protect the water for them?
Nomads in Mauritania and another group in Uganda came up with the idea of taking a hollow reed and tying a piece of filter cloth over the end of that reed and using it as a large straw. The filter cloth tied at the end of the reed would filter out the parasite and the copepods. We then worked with Vestergaard Fransen, a company, to manufacture pipe filters and then have a string so that a person could carry this pipe filter tied around their neck. So they had a way, when they're out in their farm or out hunting, to protect themselves. Having a pipe filter around your neck also became a social thing. We created a kind of peer pressure so that people were ashamed not to be seen without their pipe filters.
Thank you both so much. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Zainab.